The proposal landed on my desk like a dare. It did not come from a rival or a stranger. It came from the man who spent my entire life explaining loudly why I would never be a real lawyer. Now his firm was asking mine to save them, and he had absolutely no idea who was holding the pen. My name is Vanessa Green, and I occupy the corner office on the 42nd floor of Whitaker and Sloan Global. It is a space designed to intimidate. The walls are floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of a city that looks like a circuit board of gray and steel from this height. The furniture is Italian leather, the kind that costs more than a mid-sized sedan. And the silence here is absolute. It is the expensive, pressurized silence of decisions that move markets and destroy companies. I fought for 15 years to earn this silence. I bled for it. I sacrificed marriages, friendships, and sleep for it. And on this particular Monday morning, at exactly 9:11 in the morning, that silence was about to be broken by a ghost. My assistant, Elena, knocked once before entering. She did not wait for an answer. She knew my rhythm better than I knew it myself. She carried a stack of bound documents in her arms, balancing them against her hip with practiced ease. These were the weekly partnership requests, the desperate pleas from smaller firms looking to be absorbed, acquired, or saved by a global giant like ours. Usually, I delegated the initial review to a junior associate. Usually, these documents were nothing more than noise. Elena dropped the stack on the mahogany expanse of my desk. The sound was a heavy, dull thud. "There are 5 of them this week," Elena said, her voice efficient and detached. "The top one came in by courier this morning. They marked it urgent, which usually means they are barely making payroll. Do you want me to filter them?" I reached for my coffee, black and lukewarm, and glanced at the pile. I intended to wave her away, to tell her to send them down to the acquisition committee, but then my eyes caught the logo on the first binder. It was embossed in navy blue ink on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out by a depressurizing airlock. I froze. My hand hovered over the coffee cup, my fingers trembling so slightly that only I could feel the vibration. Caldwell. It is a common enough name. There are thousands of Caldwells in the legal registry, but I knew this one. I knew the font. I knew the pretension of the ampersand. And I knew the address listed in small print at the bottom of the cover page. St. Louis, Missouri. It was my father's firm. This was the kingdom of Richard Caldwell, the man who had looked at me across a dinner table when I was 9 years old and told his friends that I was sweet, but not built for the intellect of the law. The man who had spent my entire adolescence comparing my grades to my brother's. The man who had laughed when I told him I got into law school, shaking his head as if I had told him I was planning to become an astronaut. "You will never be a real lawyer, Vanessa," he had said. "You are too emotional. You are too soft. You do not have the killer instinct." I stared at the proposal. It sat there like a landmine wrapped in polite business stationery. "Leave it," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, rougher than usual. "Leave them all. I will review this one myself." Elena raised an eyebrow. A crack in her professional armor, but she knew better than to ask questions. She nodded and backed out of the room, closing the heavy glass door until it clicked shut. I was alone with it. I did not open it immediately. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the hard drive in my computer and the distant wail of a siren 42 stories down. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, childish rhythm that annoyed me. I was the managing partner of one of the most powerful litigation firms on the East Coast. I was a woman who had stared down federal prosecutors and negotiated billion-dollar settlements without blinking. I should not be afraid of a stack of paper. I reached out and flipped the cover open. The proposal was polished. I had to give them that. The formatting was impeccable, the executive summary written in that confident, muscular prose that mid-sized firms use when they are trying to punch above their weight class. They were framing this as a strategic partnership support request. They were offering Whitaker and Sloan the unique opportunity to tap into their established Midwestern client base. They spoke of synergy and regional expertise. It was a beautiful lie. I skipped the marketing fluff and flipped straight to the financials in the back. This was where the truth lived. Numbers do not care about your ego. Numbers do not care if you were the captain of the debate team in 1985. Numbers just are. I ran my finger down the profit and loss statement. To an untrained eye, it might have looked stable, but I did not have an untrained eye. I had eyes that were trained to find weakness. Revenue was down 12% year over year. That was the first bleed. I looked at the billable hours. The associate leverage ratio was all wrong. They were top-heavy with partners who were billing too much, while the associates were billing too little. That meant the partners were hoarding work to keep their numbers up because there was not enough work to go around. I turned the page to the client retention analysis. They had lost 3 major accounts in the last 18 months, manufacturing clients. The kind of clients that pay the lights and the lease. The report tried to gloss over it, citing market shifts. But I knew better. You do not lose 3 anchor clients in 18 months because of the market. You lose them because you are sloppy. And then, I saw it. It was a single-line item, tucked away in the risk assessment section, buried under a paragraph about lease obligations. Projected malpractice insurance. Premium increase. 250%. I stopped breathing. 250%. Insurance premiums for law firms are calculated based on risk. A jump that high does not happen because of inflation. It happens because the actuaries know something. It happens because a claim has been filed, or is about to be filed. That is going to be catastrophic. I scanned the footnotes, hunting for the explanation. There it was, in font size 8, barely legible. Pending matter regarding internal compliance review. Reserve capital allocated. A pending matter. Legal speak for a disaster. They were sitting on a ticking bomb. They were not asking for a partnership because they wanted to grow. They were asking for a lifeline because they were drowning. They needed our capital to cover a liability they could not afford, and they needed our reputation to shield them from whatever scandal was about to break. Richard Caldwell, the great legal mind, the man who demanded perfection, was captaining a sinking ship, and he had come to me. He did not know it was me. Of course, to him. Whitaker and Sloan was just a faceless entity, a checkbook, a savior. He had no idea that the managing partner, the person whose signature he needed to survive, was the daughter he had dismissed as irrelevant. I closed the folder. The leather cover felt cool under my palm. A slow, cold clarity washed over me. The anxiety was gone, replaced by something sharper, something useful. This was not a reunion. This was a transaction. And in the world of transactions, I was the shark. I hit the intercom button on my desk phone. Elena, get back in here. She appeared 10 seconds later, notebook in hand. I want a meeting scheduled with the representatives from Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch. I said, I kept my voice flat, stripping it of any emotion. When? She asked. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Elena hesitated. Your schedule is fully booked tomorrow. You have the deposition with the Pharmaceutical General Counsel at 9 and the board lunch at 12. Move the deposition. I said, push it to Wednesday. Cancel the lunch. This takes priority. She nodded, writing furiously. Who should I invite from their side? The contact person is a Grant Pierce. No, I said, tell them the meeting is mandatory for all senior equity partners. I want Richard Caldwell, Grant Pierce, and Elliot Finch. All of them. In person. No Zoom. No conference calls. If they want this meeting, they get on a plane today. Elena looked up, surprised. That is short notice. Vanessa. They are in St. Louis. I know where they are, I said. If they are desperate enough to send this proposal, they will fly red-eye if they have to. Tell them if they are not in our lobby by 9:45 tomorrow morning, the proposal is rejected with prejudice. Understood, she said. And from our side? Who do you want in the room? Everyone. I said, I want the entire executive committee. I want them to see the full weight of this firm. Elena paused. Is this a merger target? I looked at her. It is an acquisition target, but they do not know that yet. Just set the meeting." She turned to leave, but I called her back. "One more thing. Elena." "Yes?" "When they arrive tomorrow, do not bring them up immediately. Let them wait in the lobby." "For how long?" 30 minutes. I said, 30 minutes? That is aggressive. "It is necessary." I said, "Let them sit there and watch the associates walk by in suits that cost more than their cars. Let them drink the bad lobby coffee. Let them check their watches and sweat. I want them unbalanced before they even step into the elevator." Elena nodded slowly. She had seen me dismantle opposing counsel before, but she had never seen me like this. She saw the edge in my eyes. 30 minutes, she repeated. "I will let security know." She left, and the silence returned. I stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled out below me, a grid of ambition and concrete. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I could see the reflection of my own face, severe, composed, unyielding. I was 42 years old. I wore tailored silk and diamonds I had bought for myself. I commanded a firm of 400 lawyers. I remembered the last time I had seen my father. It was 5 years ago, at a funeral for an aunt I barely knew. He had looked at me with that same mixture of disappointment and boredom, asked me if I was still working at that place in New York, and then turned away to talk to my brother, Dylan, about his golf swing. He had made me feel small. He had always wanted me small. He wanted me to be the quiet daughter, the one who married a dentist and stayed in the suburbs, the one who never challenged his intellect or his authority. He had built his entire worldview on the premise that I was less than him, that I was less than Dylan, that I was decorative, not structural. I looked at the proposal on my desk. The logo seemed to mock me less now. Now, it looked like a surrender flag. "He is coming here to beg," I whispered to the empty room. "He is coming here to ask a stranger to save his legacy, because he is too arrogant to admit he failed. He thinks he is walking into a boardroom to negotiate with peers. He thinks he can charm his way out of the hole he dug." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized the prey is limping. He is about to meet the lawyer he tried to erase. The silence of my corner office was a luxury I had purchased with decades of work. But staring at my father's proposal, the silence stopped feeling like a shield and started feeling like a time machine. It dragged me back to a house in the suburbs of St. Louis, a place that smelled of lemon polish and unvoiced expectations. I did not want to go back there. I had spent 20 years running away from that house, sprinting through law school exams and 80-hour work weeks just to put distance between myself and the ghost of the girl who lived there. But the mind is a traitor. It does not care about your corner office or your Italian leather chair. It only cares about the wounds that never quite healed over. I was 9 years old the first time I understood my place in the hierarchy of the Caldwell family. It was a Sunday afternoon. My father was hosting a barbecue for the partners of his firm. I remember the humidity, the sticky heat of a Missouri summer clinging to my skin. I was sitting on the patio steps, reading a book about Roman history, trying to make myself invisible. My father stood 10 feet away, holding a scotch and soda, holding court with 3 other men in polo shirts. They were talking about their children, which was really just a socially acceptable way of comparing assets. One of the men asked about us. "Richard, your boy Dylan is playing varsity soccer this year, right?" My father beamed. His chest actually seemed to expand. "Dylan is a machine," he said. "The kid has a killer instinct. He is going to be a litigator. No doubt about it. You should see him argue his way out of chores. He has the gift." Then the man gestured toward me with his drink. "And what about the little lady? Vanessa, right? Following in the old man's footsteps too?" My father laughed. It was a dismissive, airy sound. "Vanessa? No." He took a sip of his drink, not even looking at me. "Vanessa is a sweetheart. She is bright, sure, but she is not built for law. She does not have the stomach for the fight. She is too sensitive. She will probably be a teacher, or maybe an interior designer. Something nice, something nice." I sat there, freezing. my eyes fixed on the page about Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. I felt a hot, shameful flush creep up my neck. It was not just that he thought I was weak, it was that he had decided my future for me, categorized me, and dismissed me, all before I had even finished elementary school. I was the nice one, the soft one, the one who did not matter. That narrative became the soundtrack of my life. My brother, Dylan, was 2 years older. He was the golden prince of the Caldwell dynasty. When Dylan got a B on a report card, my father blamed the teacher. When Dylan got into a fender bender, my father blamed the other driver. When Dylan made a mediocre joke at the dinner table, my father laughed until he choked. Dylan was the future attorney. He was the investment. I was the expense. In high school, I joined the debate team. I did not do it because I loved arguing. I did it because I was desperate for him to look at me the way he looked at Dylan. I worked harder than anyone else on that team. I memorized statistics. I practiced my opening statements in front of the bathroom mirror until my voice stopped shaking. Junior year, I made it to the state finals. It was held in a gymnasium 3 hours away. I told my father the date 3 weeks in advance. I put it on his calendar in the kitchen. I reminded him the morning of the event. He did not show up. I stood at the podium, scanning the bleachers while my opponent droned on about economic sanctions. I saw other parents. I saw mothers with camcorders and fathers giving thumbs-up signs. I saw an empty space where Richard Caldwell should have been. I won that debate. I brought home a plastic trophy that felt heavy with resentment. When I walked through the front door, the house was dark. My father was asleep. The next morning, he did not ask how it went. He just complained that the coffee was burnt. 2 months later, Dylan lost a student council election. He had run a lazy campaign, relying on his popularity and doing zero work. When the results were announced and he lost by 50 votes, he came home sulking. My father did not tell him to work harder. My father stormed the school the next day. He demanded a meeting with the principal. He claimed the voting process was flawed. He embarrassed himself, and he embarrassed the family, all to protect Dylan's fragile ego. That was the difference. My victories were treated like accidents. Dylan's failures were treated like injustices. I stopped trying to show him my trophies after that. I just stored them in my closet, a growing pile of evidence that he was wrong. Then came law school. I applied to the best programs in the country. I studied for the entrance exams until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. When the thick envelope arrived from a top-tier university, one ranked significantly higher than the regional school my father had attended, I left it on the kitchen counter. He found it when he came home from work. He opened it, read the acceptance letter, and then tossed it back onto the counter like it was a utility bill. "Well," he said, loosening his tie, "you got lucky." "Lucky?" I asked. My voice was tight. I had a 4.0 grade average. "Dad," he shrugged, opening the refrigerator, "they have quotas to fill. Vanessa, it looks good for them to have more women. Just do not expect it to be easy. You will probably end up doing paperwork, wills and estates, the quiet stuff. You are not cut out for the courtroom." He did not say congratulations. He did not say he was proud. He credited my hard work to a diversity quota and relegated my future career to a basement file room. I went to law school angry. I studied angry. I took exams angry, while other students were partying or networking. I was in the library, fueled by a pure distillation of rage. I graduated in the top 5% of my class. I was editor of the Law Review. I was recruited by firms in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. But the breaking point, the moment that finally severed the cord, happened the summer after my second year. I was home for a weekend visit. My parents were hosting a dinner party. The table was set with the good china, the crystal wine glasses, the heavy silver forks. The guests were 2 of my father's senior partners and their wives. The conversation, as always, turned to law. My father was in his element, telling war stories about cases he had won 20 years ago, exaggerating the stakes, painting himself as a legal gladiator. The wine was flowing. Everyone was laughing. Then, one of the partners turned to me. "So, Vanessa," he said, smiling condescendingly. Richard tells us you are halfway through law school. How is that going? Finding it a bit tough? Before I could answer, my father cut in. Oh, she struggles with the pressure, Richard said. He waved his hand dismissively. I keep telling her, there is no shame in doing research. Some people are support staff, and some people are trial lawyers. Vanessa is just too soft. She takes things to heart. Can you imagine her cross-examining a witness? She would probably apologize to them. The table erupted in laughter. My mother chuckled nervously, looking down at her plate. Dylan, who was struggling through his first year at a third-tier law school, smirked at me across the centerpiece. They were laughing at my incompetence. They were laughing at a version of me that did not exist. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not pain. It was not sadness. It was the click of a lock finally engaging. I waited for the laughter to die down. I picked up my wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down with a deliberate clink against the table. Actually, I said, my voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. I am glad you brought that up, Dad, because I wanted to share some news. The table went quiet. My father looked at me, annoyed that I had interrupted his performance. What news? He asked. I accepted a position for the summer. I said, I will be working as a summer associate at Whitaker and Sloan in New York. The silence that followed was absolute. Whitaker and Sloan was not just a law firm, it was the law firm. It was a global titan. It was the kind of place that swallowed firms like my father's for breakfast. It was harder to get a summer associate position there than it was to get into most medical schools. The partner who had spoken earlier dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his plate. Whitaker and Sloan? He repeated. The Manhattan office? Yes, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my father. In their litigation department, they selected 3 students from my class. My father's face went a shade of red I had never seen before. It was not pride, it was shock, followed instantly by humiliation. He had just spent 5 minutes telling his colleagues I was incompetent, and I had just proved that I was already operating at a level he had never reached in his entire career. He cleared his throat. Well, he muttered, that is intense. They burn people out there. You know, you will be back home in a month crying about the hours. I did not flinch. I do not think so. I said, I think I'm exactly where I belong. The dinner ended awkwardly. The guests left early. As soon as the door closed behind the last couple, my father turned on me. He was furious. What the hell was that? He shouted. What was what? I asked. Calmly stacking plates. You made me look like an idiot. He yelled. I am sitting there telling them about the reality of the business, and you have to jump in and show off? You did that on purpose. You wanted to embarrass me in my own house. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the thinning hair, the insecure set of his jaw, the fear in his eyes. He was not a giant. He was just a man who was terrified that his daughter might be better than him. I did not embarrass you. Dad, I said, you embarrassed yourself. You have spent my whole life telling everyone I am nothing. I just corrected the record. I am your father, he roared. You show me respect. I put the plates down on the counter. The sound was final. I respected you for 23 years. I said, I tried to impress you. I tried to make you proud. But I realized tonight that it does not matter what I do. You do not want me to succeed. You want me to fail so you can feel big. I walked out of the kitchen. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom. I did not cry. I did not scream. I packed my bag. I packed my clothes, my books, and the few pieces of dignity I had left. My mother came to the door, wringing her hands. Vanessa, please. He has had a lot to drink. Just apologize in the morning. No, I said. I zipped the bag shut. I walked down the stairs. My father was sitting in the living room, staring at the television, nursing another drink. He did not look up as I walked to the door. He expected me to come back. He expected me to fold, to apologize, to accept my role as the soft, incapable daughter. I opened the front door. The night air was cool. I made a vow to myself as I stepped onto the driveway. It was not a vow of revenge, Not yet. It was a vow of survival. I decided that I was done chasing a love that was conditional on my failure. I was done begging for scraps of approval from a man who wanted to see me starve. I would go to New York. I would go to Whitaker and Sloan. I would become the kind of lawyer that people like my father feared. If I ever became powerful, I thought as I started my car, it would not be so he finally loved me. It would be so he could never, ever dismiss me again. I backed out of the driveway and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I left the girl he thought I was back in that house. The woman who drove away was someone else entirely. She was cold, she was focused, and she was done being nice. That was 19 years ago. Now, sitting in my office 42 stories above the ground, looking at his desperate proposal, I realized that the vow had held. He could not dismiss me now. He needed me. And the irony was, he was right about one thing back then. I was not built for his kind of law. The small, petty, ego-driven law of strip malls and country clubs. I was built for war. And tomorrow, the war was coming to him. The first 5 years of my career were not spent in a courtroom. They were spent in a windowless room in Midtown Manhattan, surrounded by boxes of discovery documents that smelled like dust and old toner. This is the part of the story that movies usually skip. They cut from the graduation to the big closing argument, bypassing the sheer, crushing brutality of the associate years in big law. But I lived it. I lived it for 20 hours a day, 6 days a week, fueled by stale coffee and a terror so profound it felt like a physical weight in my gut. I was not afraid of the work. I was not afraid of the partners who threw staplers or the clients who screamed about billing rates. I was afraid of proving him right. Every time my eyes blurred at 3 a.m, every time I missed a wedding or a funeral or a birthday, I heard my father's voice at that dinner party. Vanessa is too soft. That sentence was the engine that drove me. It was a cold, iron rod in my spine that kept me upright when other associates were collapsing in the hallways or quitting to go work for nonprofits. I survived the attrition. I watched the class of associates I started with dwindle. The brilliant ones burned out. The social ones got distracted. The wealthy ones realized they did not need the abuse and left for their father's hedge funds. I stayed. I became a creature of the firm. I learned to sleep in 4-hour bursts. I learned to draft motions that were bulletproof, stripping my writing of adjectives and emotion until it was just pure, lethal logic. By my 4th year, I made a strategic jump. I left the general litigation pool and moved to a firm that specialized in corporate crisis management. This was the deep end. We did not handle slip and falls. We handled pharmaceutical companies facing class action lawsuits because their drugs were stopping hearts. We handled tech giants accused of stealing trade secrets. It was high stakes, high stress, and incredibly lucrative. It was also around this time that I made the appointment at the city clerk's office. I walked in on a rainy Tuesday morning during my lunch break. The clerk was a tired woman with reading glasses on a chain. She looked at my application and then at me. "Name change," she said, stamping a form. Reason? I could have told her the truth. I could have told her that every time I signed an email with the name Caldwell. I felt like a fraud. I could have told her that I wanted to erase the lineage that had rejected me. Instead, I gave her the technical answer. Personal preference. I said. She did not care. She processed the paperwork, and 10 minutes later, Vanessa Caldwell ceased to exist. In her place stood Vanessa Green. Green was my mother's maiden name. It was a common name, simple and earthy. It did not carry the pretension of Caldwell. It did not carry the weight of a mid-sized St. Louis firm that thought it was royalty. When I emailed HR to update my records, I felt lighter. It was a severing of the symbolic chain. I was no longer Richard Caldwell's disappointment. I was Vanessa Green, a lawyer who was building a reputation entirely on her own equity. My rise was not meteoric. It was mathematical. I brought in business. I won cases that other partners said were losers. I developed a reputation for being the person you called when you wanted the problem to go away quietly. I did not scream in courtrooms. I dismantled the opposition in depositions. I found the one email, the one contract clause, the one inconsistency that unraveled their entire case, and I used it to force settlements that saved my clients millions. By my mid-30s, I was made a partner. 3 years later, following a boardroom coup that I quietly orchestrated by aligning the younger rainmakers against the stagnant old guard, I became the managing partner of Whitaker and Sloan Global. I was 38 years old. The legal press ran articles about it, the new face of big law. They called me. They described me as cool, cerebral, and relentlessly efficient. They used words like shark and machine. I framed the articles and hung them in my guest bathroom. My life outside the firm was sparse. I had a sleek apartment in Tribeca that I barely saw. I had a trainer I saw twice a week at 5 in the morning. I dated, occasionally. But men found me difficult. They said I was too guarded, too analytical. They were right. I treated relationships like contracts. I looked for the exit clauses before I even signed the preamble. My connection to my family had withered to a single, fragile thread. My mother, she called me on Sunday afternoons, usually from her car or the garden. Places where my father could not hear her. Our conversations were a dance of omission. She would tell me about the weather in Missouri, about the neighbors, about her book club. I would tell her that work was busy, that I was fine, that the city was cold. We never talked about him, until the day she told me about Dylan. It was a Sunday in November. I was reviewing a merger agreement on my iPad. "Vanessa," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I wanted to tell you before you saw it on LinkedIn. Dylan made partner yesterday." I stopped scrolling. I felt a familiar, dull ache in my chest, but it was distant now, like a scar tissue stretching. "Partner," I said. "He is only 34. "Well, your father pushed for it," she said. There was a pause. "He is so proud." "Vanessa, he threw a big dinner at the country club. He gave a toast. He said the legacy is secure." I stared at the gray skyline outside my window. I could picture it perfectly. The scotch, the cigars, the backslapping, Richard Caldwell looking at his son, the mediocrity he had polished until it shined, and seeing his own reflection. "He is proud," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes," she said, desperate for me to agree. "He is just beaming. He is proud of Dylan." "Mom," I said, "not us." She went quiet. She knew I was right. She knew that if I had made partner at 34, he would have said I slept my way to the top or that the firm had a gender quota. But for Dylan, it was destiny. I changed the subject and ended the call 5 minutes later. That was the last time we spoke about the firm, but I kept watching. I did not stalk them, but I paid attention. In the legal world, information is currency, and I made it my business to know the health of every potential competitor or acquisition target. Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch was barely a blip on the national radar. But I had alerts set up. Over the last 2 years, the alerts had started to tell a story. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was a slow, agonizing slide into irrelevance. First, it was a piece in a regional business journal about a talent drain. Mid-level associates were leaving the firm for better offers in Chicago or Kansas City. That is always the first sign. The soldiers leave before the generals realize the war is lost. Then, there was a rumor on a legal blog about them losing the localized counsel role for a major insurance carrier. That was bread and butter money. That was the revenue that kept the lights on. I read these updates with a clinical detachment. I did not feel joy. I did not feel sadness. I felt like a pathologist looking at an X-ray of a terminal patient. The disease was mismanagement. The disease was arrogance. The disease was a refusal to adapt to a legal landscape that was becoming increasingly digital, global, and specialized. My father was still practicing law like it was 1995. He thought relationships and golf games were enough to hold clients. He was wrong. But the reality of their situation did not truly hit me until yesterday, when that proposal landed on my desk. I had looked at the financials. Yes, I had seen the declining revenue and the malpractice insurance spike. But last night, after I sent Elena home, I dug deeper. I pulled the court records for the St. Louis district. I found the lawsuits, not against clients, but against the firm. 2 vendors were suing them for unpaid invoices. A former partner was suing for breach of contract regarding his severance package. These were small, messy lawsuits that a healthy firm settles quietly. The fact that they were in public court meant Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch did not have the cash flow to make them go away. And then I looked at the partner list on their website. It was a retirement home. The average age of the equity partners was 62. There was no succession plan. Except for Dylan. I looked at Dylan's bio page. It was full of buzzwords: dynamic, aggressive, next generation. He listed his practice areas as general corporate and strategic litigation. It was fluff. He had no major verdicts listed, no published articles in reputable journals. He was a partner in name only, propped up by nepotism and his father's delusion. The picture became crystal clear. My father was not looking for a strategic partnership because he wanted to expand into New York. He was looking for a buyout because he was insolvent. He needed a big, cash-rich firm to absorb his liabilities, pay off his debts, and let him retire with his dignity intact. He wanted to sell the illusion of a legacy before the bank foreclosed on the reality of his failure. He was drowning, and he had reached out his hand to the only boat big enough to save him, without realizing that the captain of that boat was the daughter he had thrown overboard 20 years ago. I sat in my office as the sun went down, turning the sky a bruised purple. A younger, more emotional version of me might have felt a vindictive thrill. I might have wanted to call him and laugh. I might have wanted to reject the proposal with a cruel note attached. But I was not that girl anymore. I was Vanessa Green. And Vanessa Green did not operate on emotion. I operated on leverage. I realized then that simply rejecting them was not enough. If I rejected them, they might find another savior. Some foolish firm looking for a Midwest foothold might buy them for pennies on the dollar, and my father would walk away with a golden parachute. Telling everyone he had merged his firm successfully, he would still win. He would still be the hero of his own story. No, that was not the outcome I wanted. I opened my laptop and created a new file. I named it Project Prodigal. I began to type out a list of questions for the meeting. I formulated a strategy not for a partnership, but for a hostile dismantling of his ego. I needed to see the look in his eyes when he realized that his entire life's work was now an item on my balance sheet. I did not order champagne. I did not call my friends to brag. I simply prepared. I reviewed their client list again, highlighting the ones we would keep and the ones we would discard. I looked at their lease agreement. I looked at their debt structure. Revenge, I realized as I typed, is not about screaming. It is not about making a scene at a dinner party. Revenge is quiet. Revenge is thorough. Revenge is reading the fine print and realizing that you hold the pen, the paper, and the power. I worked until midnight. When I finally turned off the lights and walked to the elevator, the city below was a grid of electric jewels. I felt calm. I felt ready. The girl who cried in the driveway was gone. The woman who stepped into the elevator was the managing partner, and tomorrow, she was going to close the deal of her life. The conference room was air-conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees. It was a tactical choice. Cold rooms kept people alert, but they also made nervous men sweat more noticeably. I sat at the head of the long black marble table, my back to the wall of glass that overlooked the Hudson River. On my right sat my head of litigation, Marcus, and on my left was my chief financial officer, Sarah. They had been briefed to say nothing. I was the only one who would speak. We had left them waiting in the lobby for exactly 34 minutes. When the heavy double doors finally opened, 3 men walked in. They brought with them the smell of stale airplane air and nervous energy. First was Grant Pierce. He was the co-founder, the face of the firm's client relations. He wore a suit that was fashionable 10 years ago and a smile that looked practiced in country club mirrors. He was the charm offensive. Second was Elliot Finch. He was smaller, carrying a briefcase that looked too heavy for him. He was the numbers guy, the one who knew exactly how close to the edge they were standing. He looked around the room with wide, anxious eyes, assessing the cost of the furniture, the view, the power. And then there was Richard Caldwell, my father. He walked in last, but he took up the most space. He had aged. That was my first thought. The hair that used to be iron gray was now fully white. Though still thick and perfectly coiffed, his face had softened around the jawline, gravity taking its toll on the man who defied everything else. But the eyes were the same, steel blue, impatient, scanning the room not for friends, but for threats. He walked with that familiar, heavy gait, the walk of a man who assumes the ground is grateful for his footsteps. He did not look at me. He looked at the room. He looked at the view. He looked at Marcus and Sarah. His gaze slid over me as if I were part of the architecture, just another suit in a room full of suits. I had prepared for this moment for 19 years. I thought my heart would race. I thought I would feel sick. But I felt nothing but a glacial calm. It was the calm of a surgeon standing over an open chest cavity. "Please, sit," I said. My voice was lower than it had been when I was 23. It was trained, modulated for boardrooms. They took their seats at the opposite end of the table. The distance between us was deliberate. It was about 15 feet of marble, a canyon of separation. "Good morning," Grant Pierce said, leading the charge. He flashed his teeth. "We appreciate you making the time for us. We know how busy a firm of this magnitude must be. I am Grant Pierce. This is Elliot Finch, our financial lead, and this is our senior managing partner, Richard Caldwell." My father gave a curt nod. He looked bored. He looked like he was doing us a favor by being here. I clasped my hands on the table. I did not smile. "I am Vanessa Green," I said, managing partner of Whitaker and Sloan. I watched my father's face closely. He heard the name Vanessa. He heard the voice. But he did not see me. To him, Vanessa was a soft, teary-eyed girl in a suburban kitchen. Not this woman in a bespoke charcoal suit with severe glasses and hair pulled back in a tight architectural bun. To him, Vanessa Green was just a stranger with a common last name who held the checkbook. "Pleasure," my father said. His tone was perfunctory. "Let us get straight to it. Ms. Green, we have a flight back to St. Louis this evening, and I prefer not to waste time on pleasantries." The arrogance was breathtaking. He was begging for money, yet he was checking his watch. "Agreed." I said, "I have reviewed your proposal. It is optimistic." Grant Pierce laughed, a nervous, bubbling sound. "Well, we believe in the strength of our brand. Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch has been a staple of the Midwest legal community for 40 years. We offer stability. We offer deep roots. Roots rot," I said. The room went silent. Grant's smile faltered. I opened the folder in front of me. I did not look at them. I looked at the papers. "Let us talk about your churn rate." I said, "You have lost 18% of your associate base in the last 12 months. Your retention rate for junior partners is even worse. You are bleeding talent. Why?" Elliot Finch cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses. "Well, the market is competitive. We are seeing a shift in—" "It is not the market," I interrupted. I looked up and pinned Finch with a stare. "The market average for associate turnover in the Midwest is 11%. You are nearly double that, and looking at your exit interview data, which, by the way, is surprisingly easy to infer from public forums. The primary complaints are lack of advancement opportunity and an antiquated management style." I turned my gaze to my father. "Antiquated management," I repeated. My father bristled. He leaned forward. "We run a disciplined ship. Ms. Green, we do not coddle our attorneys. If they leave, it is because they could not handle the standard. We are looking for quality, not quantity." "Quality," I said. I flipped a page. "Is that why your billable hours per partner have dropped 14% in 2 years? Is that why your overhead costs have risen while your revenue has flatlined? You are paying premium rent for office space that is half empty. That is a temporary dip." My father snapped. "We are restructuring." "You are not restructuring." I said, "You are aging out." I gestured to the sheet in front of me. 70% of your equity partners are over the age of 60. You have no succession plan. You have no rainmakers under the age of 45. You are not a firm. You are a retirement community with a law library. Grant Pierce tried to intervene, his voice soothing. Ms. Green, I think you are looking at the numbers without the context. Our relationships with our clients go back decades. That kind of loyalty is not something you see on a spreadsheet. Loyalty does not pay the lease, I said. I pulled out a separate sheet of paper. Let us talk about the manufacturing clients. I said, you lost the Kemper account. You lost the Darrison Logistics account. Those two clients represented 30% of your billing in 2023. Where did they go? Grant went pale. How did you? That information is not public. People talk. I said, I know where they went. They went to firms that use artificial intelligence for document review to save them money. They went to firms that do not bill them for 3-hour lunches. They went to the future. My father slammed his hand on the table. It was a sharp, violent sound. Now see here, he said, his voice rising to that booming baritone I remembered from my childhood. We did not come here to be lectured on how to run a business by someone who... By someone who what? I asked. My voice was ice cold. By someone who holds the capital you need to avoid bankruptcy? He stopped. His mouth worked silently for a moment. He was not used to being interrupted. He was certainly not used to being interrupted by a woman. We are not bankrupt, Elliot Finch squeaked. We are simply leveraged. I closed the folder partway. Let us discuss the leverage then. I said, specifically, let us discuss the insurance. The air left the room. Grant Pierce looked at his shoes. Elliot Finch looked at the wall. My father went very still. I saw the line item for your malpractice premium renewal. I said, it is skyrocketing, 250% increase. That does not happen because of a clerical error. That happens because the carrier knows a claim is coming. A big one. I leaned forward. There is a footnote about a pending matter. Internal compliance. You have a partner who has been cooking the books, haven't you? Or maybe hiding a conflict of interest? Nobody spoke. I waited. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, until it was suffocating. If we partner with you, I said, softly, we inherit that liability. We inherit that risk. So tell me, Mr. Caldwell, who is it? Is it you? My father's face turned a mottled red. This is outrageous. We have a pristine reputation. This is a standard audit inquiry. There is no claim. You are lying. I said, it was a simple statement. I said it without anger. I said it like I was commenting on the weather. My father stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. I think we are done here, he said. Come on, Grant, Elliot, we are leaving. We will find a partner who understands the value of respect. He turned to go. Sit down. Richard. I said. I did not shout. I commanded. It was the voice of the managing partner. It was the voice of authority. He froze. He turned back slowly, shock warring with fury on his face. I looked at him. If you walk out that door, I said, who is your plan B? He stared at me. I checked the market. I continued. You have pitched this proposal to 4 other firms in Chicago and D.C. They all said no. We are the last stop. If you walk out that door, you go back to St. Louis, and you explain to your partners why you turned down the only lifeline you had because your ego got bruised. You explain to them why the firm is going to dissolve in 6 months. The truth hung in the air between us. He knew it. I knew it. He slowly sank back into his chair. He looked defeated. He looked old. I watched him for a moment. This was the man who had terrified me. This was the man whose approval I had craved like oxygen. And now, he was just a bad investment. I closed the folder completely. The sound was like a gavel. We are declining the partnership, I said. Grant Pierce slumped. Elliot Finch put his head in his hands. My father looked at me, his eyes narrowing. You are making a mistake, he said. His voice was raspy. You are walking away from 40 years of history. I am walking away from a sinking ship, I said. The decision is final. My father's face twisted. He looked at me with pure venom. You are just like the rest of them. He spat, cold, heartless. You think because you sit in a glass tower you are better than us? You do not know the first thing about real law. You are just a bean counter in a skirt. There it was, the dismissal, the misogyny, the voice of the dinner party. He stood up again, gathering his coat. You do not have the instincts for this, he muttered, almost to himself but loud enough for me to hear. You are just a little girl playing dress-up. Something inside me snapped, but it was a controlled snap. It was the safety catch coming off a weapon. I stood up. I was wearing 4-inch heels, which made me nearly 6 feet tall. I towered over the table. I looked directly into his eyes. I did not blink. I did not look away. I let the mask slip. Just a fraction. I let him see the anger I had been storing in a deep, cold cellar for 20 years. I let him see the familiarity in the set of my jaw. He stopped moving. He looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the shape of my nose. He saw the color of my eyes, his eyes. He saw the way I held my hands, a habit I had picked up from him before I learned to hate him. Confused recognition flickered across his face. He squinted, as if trying to bring a blurry picture into focus. "Vanessa?" he whispered. The word came out like a question he was afraid to ask. The room was deadly silent. Grant and Elliot were looking back and forth between us. Sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure but not understanding the cause, my father took a step toward the table. His hand reached out slightly, then dropped. "Vanessa?" he said again, louder this time. I smiled. It was the smile I had practiced in the mirror before I came in here. It was sharp, and it was cold, and it had absolutely no warmth in it. "Hello? Dad?" I said. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy enough to crush lungs. It was not the respectful silence of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. It was the terrified silence of a bomb squad, realizing they had cut the wrong wire. Grant Pierce looked at Richard. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at Richard with an expression of dawning horror. I could practically see the synapses firing in his brain as he connected the dots. The last name, the physical resemblance, the specific, granular knowledge of their internal failures. He realized suddenly that he had not walked into a business meeting. He had walked into a family execution. Elliot Finch, the nervous numbers guy, stopped breathing entirely. He shrank into his chair, trying to make himself small, trying to disappear from the blast radius, but I was not looking at them. I was looking at Richard. My father stood frozen. The color had drained from his face, leaving it the color of old parchment. His mouth was slightly open, a slackness there that I had never seen before. He looked from my eyes to my hands, to the nameplate on the table. "Vanessa Green." "Vanessa," he said again. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. It sounded like a confession. I did not sit down. I stayed standing, towering over him in my heels, using the height difference to enforce the new reality. "You look surprised." "Richard," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, deadly. "Did you think I evaporated? Did you think I just ceased to exist after I walked out of your front door?" He swallowed hard. No. Of course not. We heard you were in New York. We heard you were doing well. But this?" He gestured vaguely at the room, at the view of the Hudson River, at the evident power that surrounded us. "This is not just doing well," I said. "This is Whitaker and Sloan. This is the top of the mountain." Richard straightened his jacket. He was trying to compose himself, trying to pull the scattered rags of his dignity back together. He was a man who had spent 40 years being the biggest personality in the room, and he did not know how to be anything else. "I did not know you were a partner here," he said. His voice was gaining a little strength. A little of that old, condescending rhythm. "That is impressive. Vanessa, truly, it is a pleasant surprise." "Pleasant," I repeated. I walked slowly around the head of the table. I moved like a predator circling a wounded animal. "Let us not revise history just because we are in a boardroom." I said, "You told me I was not built for law. You told me I was too soft. You told me I would end up doing paperwork in a basement." I stopped directly behind my chair, gripping the leather back. Do you remember the debate championship in 1998? I asked. Richard blinked. The what? The state debate championship. I said, I was 17. I made it to the finals. You promised you would be there. You said it was on your calendar. I stood on that stage and looked at an empty chair for 2 hours. You never showed up. When I got home, you asked if there was any coffee left. Richard frowned, looking uncomfortable. Vanessa, that was 20 years ago. I was busy building a firm. I had clients. I ignored him. Do you remember the dinner party? I asked. The one where you told your partners, in front of me, that I was lucky to get into law school? That I was a diversity admit? That I did not have the killer instinct? He shifted his weight. I was joking. It was banter. You always took things too seriously. I took it seriously because you were my father. I said, I took it seriously because I thought you knew what a good lawyer looked like. But you were wrong. You were not describing a good lawyer. You were describing yourself. Loud, arrogant, and ultimately, limited. I gestured to the proposal on the table. And now, here you are. The man who said I would never make it. The man who said I was an embarrassment. You are sitting in my office, asking for my money, begging for my protection. Grant Pierce cleared his throat. It was a brave, stupid sound. Ms. Green, he said, his voice trembling slightly. We had no idea about the personal history here. Clearly, this is a difficult situation, but perhaps we can separate the personal from the professional? We are here to discuss a business arrangement that could benefit both firms. I turned my gaze to Grant. He withered under the attention. There is no separation, I said. I looked back at my father. He taught me that. I said, he taught me that business is personal. He brought his work home every night. He judged his children by their billable potential. He never separated the father from the senior partner. When I was 9, I was not his daughter. I was a disappointing associate. When I was 12, I was a failed investment. So do not ask me to separate it now. You are asking me to save a firm that bears the name of the man who tried to break me. That is the definition of personal. Richard looked at his partners. He saw the judgment in their eyes. He saw that he had led them into a trap of his own making. He realized that the only way out was through me. He took a deep breath. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of the ruin that was waiting for him outside that door. Vanessa, he said. His voice was lower, stripped of the bluster. Look, I am sorry. The words hung in the cold air. I am sorry if I was hard on you. He continued. I wanted you to be tough. The law is a brutal business. You know that. I pushed you because I wanted you to be ready. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I said things I should not have said, but I did it for you. I watched him. I analyzed his face, his tone, his body language. It was a performance. It was not a heartfelt apology. It was a strategic maneuver. He was apologizing because he needed a signature. He was apologizing because he was cornered. It was the same tone he used when he was trying to settle a case he knew he was going to lose. It was urgent. It was breathless. It was a man begging for oxygen. Not forgiveness. He did not mean it. He just wanted the check. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. Even now, even at the edge of the cliff, he could not be honest. He could not just say, I was wrong. He had to frame his abuse as mentorship. He had to make himself the hero who just cared too much. I stared at him for a long moment. Apology noted. I said. Richard exhaled, his shoulders dropping. He thought he had won. He thought the magic words had worked. He started to smile. A tentative, hopeful thing. Thank you. Vanessa, he said. I knew you would understand. Family is... I cut him off. The decision stands. I said, the proposal is rejected. The smile died on his face. It vanished so fast it was almost comical. What? He said. But you said I said your apology was noted. I said, I did not say it changed the fundamentals of the deal. Your firm is a liability. Your financials are a disaster. Your management structure is obsolete. An apology does not fix a 250% insurance hike. An apology does not bring back the clients you lost. Strategically, this partnership makes 0 sense for Whitaker and Sloan. Richard stared at me. He looked like I had slapped him. You are doing this out of spite, he whispered. I shook my head. No, I am doing this out of competence. You came here asking for a business decision. I am giving you one. You are a bad investment. Richard stood there, swaying slightly. The room was silent again. Then, the facade cracked. The great Richard Caldwell, the man who never lost, the man who never begged, crumbled. Vanessa, please, he said. His voice cracked. It was a ragged, ugly sound. We do not have a plan B. Grant and Elliot looked away, unable to watch. We are underwater, Richard said. The words tumbled out of him. We have 3 months of operating capital left. If we do not secure a partnership, or a loan, or something we miss payroll in June, the partners will vote to dissolve. I will lose everything. The building, the pension, the name. He gripped the edge of the table. I am 68 years old, he said. I cannot start over. I cannot lose this firm. It is my life. I watched him. I saw the sweat on his forehead. I saw the tremor in his hands. This was what I had wanted. This was the moment I had fantasized about when I was studying in the law library at 2 a.m. I wanted to see him broken. I wanted to see him admit that he was not a god, that he was just a man who had made mistakes. But now that it was happening, it did not feel like triumph. It felt pathetic. It felt like watching a statue crumble into dust. I looked at the man who had terrified me, and I realized he was small. He was terrified of losing his status, his name on the door, his country club standing. That was all he was. A collection of insecurities wrapped in a suit. I felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion. I looked at Marcus and Sarah. They were still sitting silently, their faces blank, professional masks firmly in place. Meeting adjourned. I turned and walked toward the door. Richard called out after me, Vanessa, wait, please. I did not stop. I reached the heavy glass door and put my hand on the handle. But then, I paused. I do not know why I stopped. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice. Maybe it was the fact that he was still my father, despite everything. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because I realized that destroying him was too easy. Letting him fail was simple. Owning him? That was something else. I turned back. I looked at the 3 men standing at the other end of the long table. They looked like prisoners awaiting sentencing. 1 week, I said. Richard looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. I will take 1 week to re-review the proposal. I said, but I am not promising anything, and I am not looking at it as a partnership. I am looking at it to see if there is anything in your carcass worth salvaging for my firm. If I find value, I will call you. If I do not, you will never hear from me again. Richard nodded frantically. Yes, of course. Whatever you need. Thank you. Thank you. I did not say you are welcome. I pushed the door open and walked out. I walked past the receptionist. I walked past the associates in the hallway. I kept my head high, my face impassive. I walked all the way to my corner office, stepped inside, and locked the door. Then, my legs gave out. I sank onto the sofa in the corner of the room. My hands were shaking. Not a little tremor, but a violent, uncontrollable shaking. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I looked down at my hands. They looked like a stranger's hands. I was furious with myself. I was the managing partner. I was the ice queen. I was the woman who ate stress for breakfast. And here I was, shaking like a leaf because I had spent 20 minutes in a room with my father. It made me angry. It made me realize that no matter how much money I made, no matter how many cases I won, that 9-year-old girl was still inside me, waiting for him to tell her she was not good enough. A knock on the door made me jump. Vanessa? It was Elena. Her voice was muffled by the thick wood. Are you okay? I took a deep breath. I forced the air into my lungs. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I walked to the mirror on the wall and checked my face. My eyes were bright. too bright. But otherwise, I looked perfect. I unlocked the door and opened it 2 inches. "I am fine, Elena," I said. My voice was steady. It was a lie, but it was a convincing one. "How did it go?" she asked, trying to peek inside. "It went exactly as I expected." I said, "I need you to cancel my calls for the next hour, and I need you to bring me the full due diligence file on the Caldwell firm again, the raw data, everything we have." She nodded. "Okay, right away." I closed the door and locked it again. I went back to my desk. The proposal was still there, sitting on the mahogany where I had left it yesterday. I sat down. I put my hands flat on the desk until the shaking stopped. I looked at the logo: Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch. My father had admitted he was drowning. He had admitted he had no plan B. He was weak. He was desperate. If I saved him, he would owe me, not a favor. He would owe me his survival. If I bought his firm, I would not just be acquiring a business. I would be acquiring him. I would be his boss. I would be the one setting his salary. I would be the one approving his expense reports. The thought settled in my mind, cold and heavy and satisfying. I opened the folder. I picked up my red pen. I was not going to partner with him. I was going to own him, if I saved them. I whispered to the empty room, "It will be on paper. It will be on record. And it will be on my terms." I turned to the first page and began to read. This time, I was not looking for reasons to say no. I was looking for the price tag. For the next 72 hours. My office ceased to be a place of executive oversight and became an operating theater. I assembled a team of 3 people I trusted with my life, or at least with my career, which felt like the same thing. There was Sarah, my CFO, who could smell a hidden liability from 3 states away. There was Marcus, my head of litigation, who knew where bodies were usually buried in case files. And there was a forensic accountant named David, a man so devoid of personality that he made spreadsheets look charismatic, but who possessed a terrifying ability to reconstruct a crime scene from a ledger. We called it Project Prodigal. It was a joke nobody laughed at. I told them to tear Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch apart. I did not want the marketing brochure version of the firm. I wanted the autopsy. I wanted to know every dollar that came in, every dollar that leaked out, and every skeleton rattling in their beautifully furnished closets. By Wednesday afternoon, the conference room table was buried under stacks of paper. The air smelled of cold coffee and ozone from the overheating laptops. Sarah was the first to find the pulse. She walked over to where I was standing by the window and handed me a summary sheet. "You were right to pause," she said. "If we had signed a standard partnership agreement, we would be absorbing a hemorrhage. But, Vanessa, look at this." I took the paper. My eyes scanned the highlighted columns. "Their revenue is down." "Yes," Sarah explained. "But look at the retention on their core client base, specifically, the manufacturing sector in the Midwest." I looked closer. There was a cluster of 12 mid-sized manufacturing companies, parts suppliers, logistics firms, packaging plants. They had been with the firm for an average of 25 years. They paid their bills on time. They did not argue about rates. "This is old money," Sarah said. "This is generational loyalty. These clients do not care about flash. They care that the firm knows their union contracts and their zoning laws. If we tried to win these clients on the open market, it would take us 10 years to build this kind of trust." I nodded slowly. This was the asset. This was the diamond wrapped in the dirty rags. In the legal world, steady, boring billables are worth their weight in gold. They are the ballast that keeps the ship steady when the high-stakes litigation market dips. So they have value. I said, "They do." Sarah agreed. "But you need to see what is eating that value." She gestured to David. The accountant adjusted his glasses and projected a spreadsheet onto the wall monitor. It was a mess of red ink. "Here is the problem," David said in his monotone voice. Or rather, here are the 2 problems. The first is the insurance spike you noticed. I drilled down into the claim history. He tapped a key. A name appeared on the screen. "Arthur Miller." "Who is Arthur Miller?" I asked. "Senior partner." David said, Been with the firm 30 years. He runs their estate planning division, and he has been creative. David said, for the last 4 years, he has been double billing hours on probate cases. He is charging the estate for work and then charging the beneficiaries for the same work. It is not a mistake. It is systemic. He has padded the firm's revenue by about $800,000 over 3 years. I felt a cold shiver of disgust. This was the pending matter. This was the internal compliance issue. They had a partner who was stealing from widows and orphans. Essentially, the insurance carrier caught wind of it during an audit. David continued, they are threatening to drop coverage unless the firm self-reports and pays restitution. That is the malpractice spike. It is a penalty for fraud. Does Richard know? I asked. David nodded. There are emails. He found out 6 months ago. He has been trying to cover it up, hoping to pay it back before it goes public. He is terrified of the scandal, so he is covering for a thief. I said, because he is too proud to admit his firm has rot in the floorboards. It gets worse, Marcus chimed in from the end of the table. He was holding a stack of glossy brochures. I looked at him. How does it get worse than fraud? Meet the second problem, Marcus said. He slid a folder across the table. It was labeled Business Development Expenses. I opened it. The first name I saw was Dylan Caldwell. My brother. I started reading the line items, and my jaw tightened. First-class travel to Las Vegas for client acquisition, a $30,000 sponsorship of a golf tournament that had zero strategic value, retainers for branding consultants who were charging $5,000 a month to run a Twitter account with 50 followers. He is bleeding them dry. Marcus said, he is spending marketing budget like he is a partner at a billion-dollar firm. He is chasing prestige clients, tech startups, entertainment law, that he has no business handling, and he is losing them. I looked at the case list. Dylan had taken on 3 contingency cases in the last year, high-risk lawsuits where the firm fronts the cost and only gets paid if they win. They were terrible cases, flimsy evidence, deep-pocketed defendants. He lost all 3. Marcus said, the firm ate the cost, nearly $500,000 in expert witness fees and court costs. Gone. I closed the folder. It was a classic tragedy. The father was covering up the past to protect his reputation, and the son was mortgaging the future to feed his ego. They were burning the candle at both ends, and the wax was melting all over their hands. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. Late on Thursday night, I was alone in the office, reviewing the findings, when I found a correspondence file that had been buried in the due diligence data dump. It was a letter of intent from a firm called Vanguard Legal Holdings. I knew Vanguard. They were not a law firm in the traditional sense. They were a chop shop. They acquired distressed firms, stripped their client lists, fired the senior partners, and turned the junior associates into document review drones. They were the vultures of the industry. The letter was dated 2 weeks ago. It was an offer to buy Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch. The terms were brutal. They were offering pennies on the dollar. They wanted to dissolve the partnership and liquidate the assets. I realized then why Richard had come to me. He was not just looking for a partner. He was running from the executioner. He knew that if he sold to Vanguard, his legacy would be erased, his name would be scraped off the door, and his employees would be fired. He had come to Whitaker and Sloan because he thought we were a gentleman's firm. He thought he could charm us into a soft landing. He came to me because every other door was already locked. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were a blur of gold and white. I had him. I had him completely. He was sitting on a fraudulent partner, a spendthrift son, and a predatory competitor. He was out of time, out of money, and out of options. I could crush him. I could release this information to the legal press. I could leak the details of Arthur Miller's fraud and Dylan's incompetence. The firm would implode within 48 hours. Richard would be disgraced. He would end his career in a courtroom, not as a lawyer, but as a defendant. It would be the ultimate revenge for the 9-year-old girl who was told she wasn't good enough. But as I stood there, looking at my reflection in the glass, I realized that destruction was messy. Destruction left nothing behind. I did not want to destroy the firm. I wanted to take it. I wanted those manufacturing clients. I wanted that foothold in the Midwest. And yes, in a dark, cold part of my heart, I wanted to own the structure that had rejected me. I wanted to be the one signing the checks that kept my father's lights on. I turned back to my desk. I sat down and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I was not going to offer them a partnership. A partnership implies equality. We were not equals. I began to draft a new document, acquisition agreement. I wrote the words in bold letters at the top of the page. Then I started listing the terms. First, full acquisition of all assets and liabilities. Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch would cease to exist as an independent entity. They would become a subsidiary of Whitaker and Sloan. Second, personnel. I would offer retention bonuses to the support staff and the mid-level associates who were actually doing the work. They were the victims here, and I needed them to keep the clients happy. Third, compliance. I would install my own operations manager in their office. Every dollar spent, every hour billed, would go through my systems. No more golf tournaments, no more ghost hours. Fourth, the leadership transition. I paused. This was the knife twist. Richard Caldwell would remain as a figurehead partner for a transition period of 2 years. He would keep his office, he would keep his title, but he would be stripped of all operational authority. He would not be allowed to hire, fire, or sign checks, and he would report directly to me. As for Dylan, I left his section blank for now. I would deal with him separately. Finally, the price. I looked at the valuation numbers David had crunched. The firm's debts were significant. The potential liability from the fraud was high, but the client list was valuable. I calculated a number. It was fair. It was enough to pay off their debts, cover the malpractice reserve, and leave the partners with a modest payout. It was enough to save their retirements, but not enough to make them rich. It was a save-your-life number, not a win-the-lottery number, $7 million. For a firm with 40 years of history, it was a humiliatingly low figure, but it was exactly what they were worth. I typed up the term sheet myself. I did not want my assistant to see it yet. I wanted the words to be mine. When I finished, it was 3 a.m. The document sat on my screen, clean, decisive, and irreversible. It was not a request. It was an ultimatum. I printed it out. The pages were warm in my hands. I picked up my phone. I knew my father would be awake. He never slept when he was stressed. He would be pacing his hotel room floor, waiting for the axe to fall. I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Vanessa? His voice was tight, anxious. Hello? Richard? I said, I am done with my review. There was a silence on the other end, a hopeful, terrified silence. And? He asked. I am not going to discuss it over the phone. I said, I want to see you. Okay, he said. Okay, we can come to your office on Monday morning. Grant and Elliot are... No, I interrupted. Not Monday, and not the others. I want to see you tomorrow, Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Saturday? He asked. But is that not unusual? I am making an exception, I said. Come to the office. The building is closed on weekends, so you will need to sign in at the security desk. I will bring the team. He said. No, I said. My voice was sharp. No entourage, no Grant, no Elliot, just you. He hesitated. Why just me? Because, I said, leaning back in my chair. What I have to say is for your ears only. It concerns the future of your family. The line went quiet. He knew. He had to know that I had found something. I will be there, he whispered. Good, I said. Do not be late. I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the desk. I looked at the acquisition agreement. I looked at the section where his signature would go. I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the work. He had spent my life telling me I wasn't a real lawyer. Tomorrow, I was going to show him exactly what a real lawyer does. A real lawyer does not get mad. A real lawyer gets it in writing. The Whitaker and Sloan building is a different creature on a Saturday morning. During the week, it is a hive of aggressive energy. vibrating with the sound of phones ringing, heels clicking on marble, and the hum of capitalism moving at the speed of light. But on Saturday, it is a tomb. The air conditioning hums a low, solitary note. The lights in the hallways are dimmed to 50%. It is a place of shadows and silence, where only the truly desperate or the truly dedicated can be found. I was waiting in my office at 9:45. I had instructed security to send him up without an escort. I wanted him to walk the long hallway alone. I wanted him to feel the weight of the building, the sheer scale of the institution I ran. Every step he took on the plush carpet would be a reminder of the distance between his world and mine. When the elevator chimed, the sound echoed like a gunshot. I watched the door. Richard Caldwell stepped out. He looked smaller than he had on Tuesday. Without Grant Pierce to smile for him and Elliot Finch to carry the ledgers, he looked exposed. He was wearing a casual blazer and slacks, an attempt to make this feel like a family visit, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. He clutched a leather portfolio to his chest like a shield. I had never seen my father enter a room without certainty. He usually walked in like he owned the deed to the floorboards. Today, he walked in like a man who was afraid the floor might open up and swallow him whole. He reached my open door and hesitated. "Come in." "Richard," I said. I did not stand up. I remained seated behind my desk, my hands folded on the polished wood. He entered and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch was loud in the empty room. "Vanessa," he said. He tried to smile, but it was a grimace. "It is quiet in here today. It is Saturday," I said. "The markets are closed, but we are not. Please, sit." He sat in the same chair he had occupied during the board meeting. He looked at the empty seats beside him, the ghosts of his partners. "So," he said, clearing his throat, "you said you had news. You said you had re-reviewed the proposal." I did not answer immediately. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a single blue folder. I slid it across the mahogany desk. It stopped exactly at the edge, right in front of him. "Read it," I said. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. Then, with a trembling hand, he opened it. I watched his eyes scan the cover page. I watched the confusion knit his brow. "Acquisition?" he muttered. He looked up, a forced laugh escaping his lips. "Vanessa, I think there is a typo. We discussed a strategic partnership, a merger of resources. This says this is a purchase agreement. Keep reading." I said. He turned the page. He read the terms. He read the section on asset liquidation. He read the section on leadership restructuring. As he read, the color drained from his face until he looked like a wax figure. "This dissolves the partnership," he said, his voice rising in panic. "Vanessa, this turns us into a subsidiary. We would lose our independence. We would lose our name. You would lose your debt," I corrected. "You would lose your liability, and you would keep your pensions." He slammed the folder shut. "I cannot sign this," he said. "This is an insult. I built that firm from nothing. I started it in a 2-room office above a bakery. I cannot just sell it for scrap parts. Then do not sign it." I said. I leaned back in my chair. "But before you walk out, you need to understand exactly what you are walking away from." Richard stared at me. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Is this revenge?" he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "Is that what this is?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and self-pity. "Is this because I was hard on you? Is this because I did not come to your debate meets? You are going to humiliate me, strip me of my legacy, just to settle a score from 20 years ago?" I looked at him. I felt a surge of pity, but I crushed it. Pity was dangerous. Pity was what got him into this mess. "No, Richard," I said. My voice was steady, stripping away any emotion he could latch onto. "If this were revenge, I would let you walk out that door. I would let you go back to St. Louis and wait for the inevitable. I would let you default on your loans in 3 months. I would let the State Bar Association disbar you when the audit comes through. I would let you collapse." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Revenge is emotional. This is business, and this is protection. I am offering to protect the people who work for you, the paralegals who have been with you for 15 years, the associates who have student loans, the clients who trust you. They do not deserve to lose their livelihoods just because you made mistakes. He flinched at the word mistakes. I made business decisions. He argued weakly. The market turned against us. Stop it, I said. The command was sharp. Stop lying. I know about Arthur Miller. The room went dead silent. Richard froze. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I know about the billing irregularities. I continued, my voice relentless. I know he has been double billing the estate clients. I know you found out 6 months ago. And I know you covered it up because you were terrified that a scandal would ruin your reputation in the club. He slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him instantly. How? He whispered. How do you know? I did due diligence. I said, real due diligence, not the cursory glance you gave your own books. I stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge so I was looking down at him. And I know about Dylan. I said. Richard looked up, his eyes pleading. Dylan has nothing to do with this. Dylan has everything to do with this. I said, I know he is the one who convinced you to hide the fraud. I know he told you it would blow over. I know he told you that if you just landed one big client, you could pay the money back before the insurance auditors noticed. Richard looked down at his hands. He did not deny it. He said we could fix it. Richard murmured. He said it was a temporary cash flow problem. He said we had to protect the family name. He lied to you, I said. He gambled with your license because he was too arrogant to admit the ship was sinking. And you let him. You listened to him because he is the son you always wanted. And you ignored the math because the math was telling you that you failed. Richard put his head in his hands. It was a gesture of total defeat. I was afraid. He confessed. His voice was muffled. I was afraid of the shame. If it came out 40 years, Vanessa, 40 years of building a reputation, gone in a day, I thought I could manage it. I thought we could outrun it. You cannot outrun arithmetic, I said, and you cannot outrun vultures. I walked back to my desk and picked up a piece of paper. I know about Vanguard Legal Holdings. I said. Richard looked up, startled. I know they made you an offer 2 weeks ago. I said, I know they offered to buy you for parts. I know they planned to fire 70% of your staff and liquidate your client list. He went pale. They said that offer was confidential. Nothing is confidential when a firm is dying. I said, I know you came to me because Vanguard is the only other option. You did not come here to partner. You came here to hide. You wanted me to be your shield against the wolves. He did not speak. He could not. I had stripped him bare. I had taken away every lie, every defense, every shred of dignity he had wrapped around himself. So here's the reality. I said. I tapped the blue folder. This is not a negotiation. This is a rescue mission. But I am not rescuing you. I am rescuing the asset. I sat down again. Here are the non-negotiables. I said, first, full disclosure. We self-report the billing fraud to the insurance carrier immediately. My firm will handle the negotiations. We will pay the restitution. We will clean up the mess. Richard nodded slowly. He looked relieved that he would not have to carry the secret anymore. Second, I continued, compliance overhaul. My operations team takes over your billing, your HR, and your expense accounts effective Monday morning. Every dime is tracked. And third, I said, the leadership structure. I watched him. This was the hardest part. You stay on as a senior partner. I said, you keep your office, you keep your title, to the outside world. This is a merger of strength. You get to retire with your head high. You get the retirement party. You get the speeches. He brightened slightly. That is generous. But, I added, and my voice dropped an octave, internally, you have no authority. You do not sign checks. You do not hire. You do not fire. You do not make strategy decisions. Richard frowned. Then what do I do? You handle client relationships. I said, you shake hands. You play golf. You do what you are good at, but you do not run the business. And I said, delivering the final blow. You report to me. He stared at me. Me? He asked. You report to the managing partner's office. I said, that is me. We will have a weekly call. You will update me on client retention, and if I give you an instruction, you will follow it. His jaw tightened. The pride was flaring up again. The old instinct to dominate. Vanessa, he said, I am your father. You cannot expect me to take orders from you. It is unnatural. It is the deal. I said, I pointed to the door. Orba, you can walk away. You can go back to St. Louis. You can call Vanguard. You can let them strip your firm. You can let Arthur Miller go to jail. You can let Dylan explain to the Bar Association why he is incompetent. It is your choice. He looked at the door. Then he looked at the folder. He looked at the pen sitting on top of it. He was trapped. Not by me, but by the truth. He took a deep, shuddering breath. If I sign this, he said quietly, if I do this, is there a chance for us? I looked at him. What do you mean? I asked. I mean us. He said, you and me, father and daughter. I know I messed up. I know I was not the father you needed, but I am proud of you. Vanessa, I see what you built here. It is incredible. I want to know you, not as a business partner, but as my child. He looked sincere. For the first time in my life, he looked like he actually wanted to bridge the gap. But I also knew him. I knew that right now. He was vulnerable. He was grasping for connection because he had lost his power. I did not smile. I did not soften. We can try, I said, but it will not be like it was. I am not the girl who needs you to tell me I am smart. I am not the girl chasing your approval. I leaned forward. I am offering you time. Richard, I am offering you proximity, but I am not offering you a clean slate. You have to earn that, and you do not earn it by being my father. You earn it by being honest. You earn it by respecting the boundaries I set. He nodded. He understood. Time, he said. I can work with time. He reached for the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. One more thing. I said. He looked up. Dylan? I said. What about him? Richard asked nervously. He is not a partner anymore. I said. Richard started to protest. Vanessa, you cannot. He is your brother. This will destroy him. He destroyed himself. I said. The agreement downgrades him to, of counsel. He loses his equity. He goes on a salary. And he goes on a performance improvement plan. If he does not hit his targets in 6 months, he is out. But Richard stammered, that is the price. I said, I am not financing his ego anymore. He learns to be a real lawyer, or he finds a new career. Richard looked down at the paper. He saw the future of his family written in black and white. It was harsh. It was clinical, but it was survival. He picked up the pen. He signed his name. Richard Caldwell. The scratching of the pen against the paper sounded loud in the silence. He closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk to me. It is done, he said. His voice was hollow. I placed my hand on the folder. I felt a strange vibration, like the humming of a wire that has finally stopped carrying a current. Thank you, I said. Richard stood up. He looked unsteady. So, he said, what happens now? Now, I said, standing up to meet him. Now. We work. I walked to the door and opened it for him. He walked out into the hallway. He paused and looked back at me. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash, shaken, bruised, but alive. I will see you on the weekly call. Ms. Green, he said. I nodded. Goodbye, Mr. Caldwell. I said. I watched him walk to the elevator. He walked a little slower than he had when he arrived. His shoulders were slumped, but he was still walking. I closed the door. I went back to my desk and picked up the folder. I looked at his signature. I had done it. I had bought the firm that said I was worthless. I had saved the father who said I was weak, and I had done it without raising my voice, without shedding a tear, and without compromising a single inch of my power. I swiveled my chair around to look out at the city. He once said, I would never be real. Now, he worked for me, and the hardest part was just beginning, because now I had to deal with Dylan, and Dylan was not going to go quietly. The ink on the acquisition agreement was barely dry when the shockwave hit. I had expected resistance. I had expected a difficult integration process, but I had underestimated the sheer, volatile explosiveness of a golden child who has just been told his inheritance is canceled. Richard had flown back to St. Louis on Saturday afternoon, carrying the document that saved his firm and ended his reign. I assumed he would call a partners meeting on Monday morning to break the news gently. I assumed he would frame it as a victory, a strategic merger that preserved their pensions. I assumed he would manage Dylan. I was wrong. On Tuesday morning, at 6:30 in the morning, my phone vibrated on my nightstand. It was not an alarm, it was a Google alert. Legal insider. Whitaker and Sloan managing partner, accused of undisclosed family conflicts in Midwest merger. I sat up, the sleep vanishing instantly. I tapped the link. The article was behind a paywall, but the summary was damning enough. It claimed that an anonymous source close to the deal had revealed that Vanessa Green was secretly bailing out her father's failing firm, using Whitaker and Sloan capital to settle personal scores and shield family members from malpractice liability. It used words like nepotism, ethical breach, and fiduciary failure. I did not panic. I did not throw the phone. I walked to my kitchen, made a double espresso, and read the full article on my tablet. The details were surgical. The source knew about the malpractice insurance spike. They knew about the specific debt load. They knew about the acquisition price, $7 million. That number had only existed in a draft folder on my secure server and on the physical paper I gave Richard. This was not a generic leak. This was an assassination attempt. By 8 o'clock, I was in the boardroom of Whitaker and Sloan, facing my own executive committee. The atmosphere was frigid. These were people who respected me, who feared me, but who also had a fiduciary duty to the firm. If I was using the firm's money to play happy families, they would vote me out before lunch. It is true, I said, standing at the head of the table. Richard Caldwell is my father. A murmur went through the room. However, I continued, sliding a packet of disclosures across the table. It is also true that I disclosed this relationship to the Conflicts Committee 3 years ago when I first took the managing partner role. Listing all potential family connections in the legal industry, it is in my personnel file. I pointed to the screen behind me, where Sarah, my CFO, had projected the due diligence report. Furthermore, I said, this is not a bailout. This is a hostile takeover of a distressed asset at 20 cents on the dollar. We are acquiring a loyal manufacturing client base that generates $4 million a year in recurring revenue, and we are paying a fraction of its value. We are stripping the leadership. We are imposing our compliance standards. If this were a stranger's firm, you would be applauding the ruthlessness of the deal. The fact that he is my father is a biological trivia point, not a business strategy. I walked them through the numbers. I showed them the profit projections. I showed them the text of the acquisition agreement, specifically the clause that stripped Richard of operational control by the time I finished. The mood had shifted. They were not angry anymore. They were impressed. So, the leak? Marcus asked, tapping his pen. If this is a good deal, who is trying to torpedo it? I looked at the specific phrasing in the article again. Shield family members from malpractice liability. It was a very specific angle. It was designed to make me look corrupt, but it also hinted at a deep, personal grievance. I have a theory. I said, give me an hour. I went back to my office and called my forensic IT specialist. We did not have to look far. The leak had been sent to the reporter via a burner email account, but the sender had been sloppy. They had attached a PDF of the draft term sheet, the specific version I had given to Richard on Saturday. The metadata on the PDF showed the last user who had accessed and saved the file. D.Caldwell_admin, Dylan, of course. Richard had shown him the agreement. Richard, in his weakness, had probably tried to explain that this was the only way to save the firm, and Dylan, seeing his name listed under of counsel, with a salary reduction and a performance improvement plan, had lost his mind, but it was worse than just a temper tantrum. 10 minutes later, my assistant rushed in. "Vanessa, we just received a motion filed in the Missouri Circuit Court. It is a temporary restraining order to block the acquisition." I took the document. It was filed on behalf of minority partners of Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch. It claimed that the managing partner, Richard Caldwell, did not have the authority to sell the firm without a unanimous vote, and it cited a competing offer that was superior in value. The competing offer was from Vanguard Legal Holdings. I stared at the paper. The picture was complete. Dillon had not just leaked the story to embarrass me. He was actively working with Vanguard. He was trying to blow up my deal, destroy the firm's reputation, and force a sale to the chop shop, presumably because Vanguard had promised him something I would not: a title. He would rather be the captain of a pirate ship than a deckhand on a luxury liner. He was willing to burn his father's legacy to the ground just to keep a corner office. I felt a cold, sharp anger that was entirely different from the professional detachment I usually maintained. This was familial. This was the little boy who used to break my toys when I wasn't looking, now grown up and trying to break my career. I picked up my phone. I did not call Richard. I dialed Dillon's cell number directly. He answered on the second ring. "Vanessa," he said. His voice was smug. "I see you saw the news. Rough morning? You are playing a dangerous game." "Dillon," I said, "I am protecting the firm." He shot back. "You think you can just waltz in here and steal everything Dad built? You think you can turn us into your little satellite office and put me on a performance plan?" "I am a named partner. Vanessa, you are a liability." I said, "And you are a traitor. I know you sent the term sheet to the press, and I know you are talking to Vanguard." "So what if I am?" he said. "Vanguard recognizes talent. They offered to keep me on as vice president of litigation. They value me. They are lying to you." I said, "Vanguard fires everyone within 6 months. They are using you to get the client list, and once they have the files transferred, they will change the locks. You are selling your father out for a title that will not exist by Christmas. I am saving Dad," he shouted. "You are the one humiliating him. You made him come to New York and beg. You made him sign that paper that neuters him. You are doing this to punish Dad for not coming to your stupid debate meets 20 years ago. You are pathetic." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the words wash over me. The old accusation, "You are too emotional." "No, Dillon," I said, "you are projecting. I am not doing this to punish Dad. I already won that battle. I am doing this because I am a better lawyer than you. And you cannot stand it. You cannot stand that the sister you mocked, the one who was supposed to be a school teacher, is the one holding the keys to the kingdom." I opened my eyes. "But here is the reality," I continued. "You forged that partner consent form for the restraining order, didn't you?" The line went quiet. "Grant Pierce called me 5 minutes ago." I lied. It was a calculated risk. Grant had no idea about the motion, but Dillon didn't know that. Grant says he never signed off on a restraining order. He says you told him the deal with me was moving forward. Dillon stammered, "I have implied consent. I am a partner. You have nothing." I said, "You filed a fraudulent motion in state court. That is not just grounds for disbarment. That is a felony." I waited. I could hear his breathing hitch. "Here is what is going to happen." I said, "I am flying to St. Louis. I will be there in 4 hours. We are going to have a meeting. You, me, and Dad. And we are going to finish this. You cannot just, if you are not in the conference room at 2 o'clock. I said, "I send the evidence of the leak and the forged motion to the ethics board. You will not just lose your job. You will lose your license. Do not test me." "Dillon, you know I always did my homework." I hung up. I did not wait. I told Elena to book the corporate jet. I grabbed my coat and the file containing the metadata evidence. The flight to St. Louis took 2 hours. I spent the time staring out the window, watching the clouds shift. I thought about Richard. I thought about the choice he was about to face. For 40 years, he had protected Dillon. He had covered his grades, his accidents, his incompetence. He had built a reality distortion field where Dylan was the golden boy, and I was the failure. Today, that field was going to collapse. I arrived at the Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch offices at 1:55. The receptionist looked terrified when I walked in. She knew who I was. The whole firm probably knew by now that the wolf was at the door. I walked straight to the main conference room. Richard was there. He was sitting at the head of the table, looking like he had aged 10 years since Saturday. Dylan was standing by the window, pacing. He looked sweaty and manic, his tie loosened, his suit rumpled. When I walked in, Dylan spun around. "Here she comes," he sneered. "The Queen of New York. Sit down." "Dylan," I said. I threw the file onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap. I looked at Richard. "Did he tell you?" I asked. Richard looked at me, his eyes full of pain. "Did he tell me what? Did he tell you that he is the source of the leak?" I asked. "Did he tell you that he sent the confidential term sheet to the legal insider? Did he tell you that he is cutting a side deal with Vanguard to sell this firm for scrap? Just so he can pretend to be a vice president?" Richard looked at Dylan. "Is this true?" Dylan waved his hands. "She is spinning it. Dad, she is trying to turn you against me. I leaked it to get leverage. We needed better terms. She was robbing us." "And the Vanguard deal?" Richard asked. His voice was quiet. Dylan hesitated. "They are interested. They appreciate the brand. They want to liquidate us." Richard said, "We discussed this. We agreed Vanguard was a death sentence." Dylan exploded. "No, you agreed. You agreed to sell your balls to her. I am trying to save our dignity." I stepped forward. "There is no dignity in fraud." "Dylan," I said. I turned to Richard. "He filed a motion this morning to block the acquisition." I said, "He claimed he had partner consensus. Did Grant sign that motion? Did Elliot?" Richard shook his head. "No, we knew nothing about it." I looked at Dylan. "You forged their signatures. Or you misrepresented their intent to the court." I said, "Either way, you committed a crime." Dylan laughed. A desperate, high-pitched sound. "It is a delay tactic. It is standard litigation strategy. You would know that if you weren't so busy playing corporate overlord." I looked at Richard. "This is the moment." "Richard," I said. I pointed at Dylan. "He is dangerous. He has exposed you to a breach of contract lawsuit. He has exposed you to an ethics investigation. And he is actively working with a competitor to destroy the only lifeline you have." I took a breath. "I am not acquiring a firm with him in it." I said. Richard looked up, startled. "What?" "The deal has changed." I said, "Saturday. I was willing to let him stay as of counsel. I was willing to give him a chance. But after today? After the leak? After the forgery?" "No." I set a single sheet of paper on the table. "This is a resignation letter." I said, "Effective immediately. He surrenders his partnership equity. He leaves the building today, and he signs a non-disclosure agreement. And if I don't," Dylan challenged, "then I walk." I said, "I withdraw the offer. I let Vanguard have you. And I forward this file to the state prosecutor. You can explain your litigation strategy to a judge." Dylan looked at Richard. "Dad, tell her she's crazy. You cannot let her kick me out. I am your son. I am the future of this firm." Richard looked at Dylan. He looked at the sweaty face, the shifting eyes, the entitlement that radiated off him like heat. He looked at the son he had codified and protected for 36 years. Then he looked at me. He saw the stillness. He saw the discipline. He saw the daughter who had built an empire without his help, who had come back to save him despite his cruelty. He realized, finally, that he had bet on the wrong horse. Richard stood up. He looked heavy, burdened by a lifetime of wrong choices. He turned to Dylan. "She is right," Richard said. Dylan's mouth dropped open. "Dad, you leaked the document," Richard said. "You betrayed the firm. You betrayed me." "I did it for you," Dylan screamed. "No," Richard said, his voice gaining strength. "You did it for yourself. You could not stand the idea of not being the boss. You were willing to let Vanguard burn it all down just so you could be king of the ashes." Richard looked at me. "I will not sacrifice the firm for him anymore." He said, I will not sacrifice the staff, and I will not sacrifice you. He looked back at Dylan. Sign the letter. Dylan. Dylan stared at him, betrayed. You are joking. You are choosing her? The girl who cried when she lost a debate? I am choosing the real lawyer, Richard said. The silence that followed was absolute. Dylan looked from Richard to me. He saw the united front. He saw the wall that had finally risen to stop him. He snatched the pen from the table. He scribbled his name on the resignation letter. Tearing the paper in his fury. There, he spat. Take it. Take the rotting corpse of a firm. I do not want it anyway. I am going to Vanguard. They will appreciate me. He threw the pen against the wall. He stormed out of the room. We heard his footsteps pounding down the hallway, then the slam of the front door. Richard sank back into his chair. He put his hands on the table to steady himself. He looked like a man who had just amputated his own arm. I walked over to the table and picked up the resignation letter. It was done. The cancer was cut out. I looked at my father. Are you okay? I asked. No, he said. He looked up at me, his eyes full of tears. I am not okay. I just fired my son. You saved your firm. I said. Richard shook his head. I should have done it 10 years ago. He whispered. I knew, deep down. I always knew. He was not you. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given me. It was jagged and painful. But it was true. I put the letter in my briefcase. I will have my team file the motion to dismiss his restraining order. I said, we can close the deal by Friday. Richard nodded. He looked out the window. Where the sun was starting to set over the city he used to think he owned. Vanessa? He said. Yes? Don't let Vanguard get him, he said. I know he is. I know what he is. But he is still my boy. Do not let them destroy him completely. I looked at him. Even now. He wanted to protect him. I cannot control what Vanguard does. I said, but if he stays away from us, I will not pursue the ethics charges. That is the best I can do. That is enough, Richard said. I turned to leave. I had a plane to catch. I had a firm to run. I walked out of the conference room. Leaving my father alone in the silence he had created, I had won. But as I walked down the hall, passing the empty offices and the rows of dusty law books, I did not feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I had cut the chain. I had defeated the golden child. I had forced the recognition. But I was starting to realize that the view from the top of the mountain is beautiful, but it is also very, very cold. The resignation of Dylan Caldwell did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a glass-walled conference room, but the aftershocks were felt in every cubicle and corner office of the St. Louis firm. When he stormed out, he left behind a vacuum of authority that needed to be filled immediately. Before panic could set in, the rumor mill was already spinning. Associates were whispering near the coffee machines. Paralegals were eyeing the exits. I did not give them time to panic. I ordered an all-hands meeting for 4 o'clock that same afternoon. We gathered in the main atrium, the staff of Caldwell. Pierce and Finch looked tired. They looked like the crew of a ship that had been taking on water for years. Led by officers who were too busy drinking in the captain's quarters to notice the leak. There were about 60 people in total. Attorneys, support staff, IT personnel. They stood in clusters, arms crossed, waiting for the axe to fall. I stood off to the side. This was Richard's moment. I had forced his hand, yes, but he had to be the one to deliver the message. If I spoke first, it would look like a hostile conquest. If he spoke first, it was a transfer of command. Richard walked to the center of the room. He looked older than his 68 years. The swagger was gone. The booming courtroom voice was dialed down to a human frequency. He looked at his people. He looked at the faces of men and women who had given him decades of their lives. People whose pensions were currently sitting in a precarious balance. Today, Richard began, his voice wavering slightly before finding its footing. My son, Dylan, has resigned from the firm. A ripple of shock went through the room. A few people exchanged glances. They knew Dylan. They knew his arrogance. They knew his mistakes. But they never thought Richard would cut the cord. He is leaving, Richard continued, because we are entering a new chapter, and because, for too long, I allowed personal feelings to cloud my professional judgment. The room went dead silent. This was not corporate speak. This was a confession. I built this firm on the idea of excellence, Richard said, but somewhere along the way, I let standards slip. I prioritized family over merit. I protected the wrong people, and I ignored the right ones. I let you down. I watched him. It was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say. It was painful to watch, like seeing a bone being reset without anesthesia. But it was necessary. However, Richard said, straightening his shoulders, we are not going under. We are evolving. I am proud to announce that, as of this week, Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch will be acquired by Whitaker and Sloan Global. He gestured toward me. This is not a buyout. He lied, sticking to the script I had given him, but delivering it with surprising conviction. This is a strategic expansion. Vanessa Green, managing partner of Whitaker and Sloan, will be overseeing the integration. She is one of the finest legal minds in the country, and she is going to secure your future. All eyes turned to me. I stepped forward. I did not smile. I did not try to be their friend. I radiated competence. Thank you. Richard, I said. My voice carried to the back of the room without a microphone. Here is what is going to happen, I said. No one is losing their job today. No one is losing their pension. Your payroll is secure. In fact, effective immediately. We are implementing the Whitaker and Sloan compensation scale for all support staff. That means a 15% raise for every paralegal and administrative assistant in this room. The tension broke instantly. Shoulders dropped. A few tentative smiles appeared. I had bought their loyalty in 30 seconds. But, I added, my tone sharpening, we are also implementing Whitaker and Sloan performance standards. The free ride is over. We track hours. We track efficiency. We track results. If you work hard, you will be rewarded better than you ever have been. If you are coasting, you will find it very uncomfortable here. I looked around the room. We start tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I said. The integration was surgical. I brought in a transition team from New York. 3 of my best operations managers. We swept through the St. Louis office like a cold wind. We replaced the antiquated servers. We installed new billing software that flagged irregularities instantly. We audited every open case file. But my most important move was not technological. It was cultural. I went looking for the invisible people. In every bad firm, there are people who do 80% of the work for 20% of the credit. They are the workhorses who get ignored because they are not related to the boss, or because they do not play golf, or because they just put their heads down and grind. I found a senior associate named Maya. She was 32, brilliant, and stuck in a windowless office reviewing contracts for Arthur Miller, the partner who had been committing fraud. Maya had billed 2,400 hours the previous year. She had practically run the estate planning division while Miller was busy stealing. I called her into my temporary office on Wednesday. Maya, I said. I looked at her file. Why are you not a partner? She looked nervous. She smoothed her skirt. Mr. Caldwell, Richard, said I needed more time. He said I did not have the executive presence. I looked at her numbers. She had saved the firm 3 times in court appearances that Miller had been too hungover to handle. Richard was wrong. I said, I slid a contract across the desk. You are acting head of the estate planning division. Effective now. I said, you report directly to me. You clean up Miller's mess. You apologize to the clients. You fix the trust accounts. If you pull it off, you are an equity partner in 12 months. Maya stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she wanted to cry, but she didn't. She just nodded, her eyes burning with a sudden, fierce ambition. I can do it, she said. I know. I said, now go back to work. I did this 5 times. I promoted a litigator who had been buried under Dylan's shadow. I promoted a paralegal to office manager because she knew where every penny was buried. I built a new leadership team from the ashes of Richard's boys' club. Richard watched all of this from his office. He had kept his title. As promised, he sat in his leather chair, surrounded by his awards, but the phone stopped ringing for him. The decisions were bypassing him. He watched me run meetings with a precision that was alien to him. I did not shout. I did not tell war stories. I listened to data. I made a decision, and I moved to the next item. One afternoon, he stood in the doorway of the conference room while I was dissecting a complex merger strategy with Maya and the new team. We were moving fast, speaking in shorthand, laughing at the complexity of the problem, not the weakness of the opponent. Richard looked lost. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his way of practicing law, the schmoozing, the bluster, the intuition, was obsolete. He was watching a machine operate, and he was the ghost in the gears. But the war was not quite over. 2 weeks into the transition, Vanguard Legal Holdings made their move. They were angry. They had lost their prize. They had lost the chance to strip the firm. And they knew Dylan was out of play, so they decided to scorch the earth. I received a letter on a Tuesday morning. It was a formal complaint filed with the State Ethics Board, alleging that Whitaker and Sloan had engaged in predatory acquisition practices and hinting at conflicts of interest simultaneously. 3 of our largest manufacturing clients received calls from Vanguard, offering to undercut our rates by 30% if they switched immediately. It was a classic shakedown. They wanted to scare us. They wanted me to settle, to pay them a consulting fee to go away. Richard panicked. He came into my office, waving the letter. "Vanessa, this is a disaster," he said, his face pale. "If the ethics board opens an investigation, the press will be all over it. And the client's Darrison Logistics is already asking questions. We need to call Vanguard. We need to make a deal." I looked up from my laptop. I was eating a salad. "Sit down." "Richard," I said. He kept pacing. "You do not know these people. They are vicious. They will drag this out for years." I finished a bite of lettuce. "I do not negotiate with terrorists," I said, "and I certainly do not negotiate with second-rate chop shops." I picked up the phone and called my head of litigation in New York. "Marcus," I said, "execute the counterstrike." I had prepared for this. I knew Vanguard would lash out. Within 3 hours, we filed a lawsuit against Vanguard Legal Holdings in federal court. We did not just sue for tortious interference. We sued for corporate espionage. We used the evidence from Dylan's leak, the metadata, the emails, the timeline, to prove that Vanguard had actively solicited confidential information from a partner to devalue the firm before an acquisition. It was a nuclear option. It exposed their entire business model. Then, I got on a plane and flew to the headquarters of Darrison Logistics. I walked into the CEO's office. He was a gruff man who had known my father for 20 years. He looked skeptical. "I hear you are raising rates," he said, "and I hear your competitors are offering a discount." I sat down. "I did not offer a discount. I am not raising rates," I said. "I am keeping them exactly where they are. But here's what you get for that rate." I laid out the new capabilities. I showed him how Whitaker and Sloan's global reach could help his supply chain in Asia. I showed him how our tax specialists could save him 12% on his export duties. I showed him that by staying with us, he wasn't just hiring a lawyer in St. Louis. He was hiring an army. "Vanguard can offer you a discount." I said, "But when your containers get stuck in customs in Shanghai, Vanguard cannot help you." "I can." The CEO looked at the numbers. He looked at me. "You are not much like your father, are you?" he asked. "No," I said, "I am not." He signed the retainer renewal. By Friday, Vanguard had withdrawn their complaint. They dropped the lawsuit. They went silent. They realized that if they pushed me, I would not just beat them. I would dismantle them in discovery. They retreated to find easier prey. I returned to the office on Monday to find the atmosphere transformed. The fear was gone. The staff walked faster. The phones were ringing with new business, not complaints. The St. Louis office, which had been bleeding cash for 2 years, posted its first profitable month in May. We were not just surviving, we were thriving. The dying firm had become a regional engine, powered by Whitaker and Sloan's infrastructure and the unleashed talent of the people Richard had ignored. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The sign on the door had changed. It now read Whitaker and Sloan, with formerly Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch in smaller, tasteful letters underneath. I was packing up my temporary office. My work was done here. I had installed a new managing director, Maya, who had risen to the occasion exactly as I predicted. I was going back to New York. Richard knocked on the doorframe. He looked healthy. The stress of the debt was gone. He was playing golf 3 times a week. He was handling client dinners. He was the elder statesman he always wanted to be, without the burden of actually running the business. "Leaving?" he asked. "Yes," I said, snapping my briefcase shut. "The flight is at 6. He walked into the room. He looked around at the clean surfaces, the organized files, the lack of chaos. "You did it," he said. "I did not think you could. I thought a lot of things." He paused. He looked at me with a strange expression. It was softer than I had ever seen. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. He took a step closer. "You saved the family. Vanessa, you saved my reputation. I know I was difficult. I know I was not the father you deserved. But you stepped up. You acted like a true Caldwell." He reached out, as if to hug me, as if to claim this victory as a genetic triumph, as if my success was just a reflection of his bloodline. I stepped back. It was a small movement, but it was a chasm. I held up a hand. "Stop," I said. Richard froze. His arms dropped. "Do not do that," I said. My voice was gentle, but it was steel. "Do not frame this as family duty. Do not frame this as me finally living up to the Caldwell name." I looked him in the eye. "I did not do this because I am a Caldwell. I did this because I am a Green. I did this because I learned to survive in a world that you told me I was too soft for." I walked around the desk until I was standing right in front of him. "You want to thank me, Richard? Then do not thank me like a father who is proud that his daughter finally learned to play his game." I straightened my blazer. "Thank me like a subordinate thanking his boss for saving his job. Thank me like a partner thanking the managing partner for saving his equity. Thank me like a leader, because that is what I am." Richard stared at me. He looked at the woman standing in front of him. He saw the distance. He saw the power dynamic. He saw that he could not bridge the gap with sentimentality. He swallowed hard. He straightened his own jacket. He nodded. A sharp, respectful nod. "Thank you, Ms. Green," he said. I nodded back. "You are welcome, Mr. Caldwell." I picked up my briefcase and walked past him. I did not feel a surge of warmth. I did not feel the fuzzy glow of reconciliation. I felt something colder, something harder, and infinitely more satisfying. I felt closure. I had not just won the war, I had rewritten the history books. I had taken the narrative of my life out of his hands and locked it in a vault where he could never touch it again. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking on the floor I now owned. I pressed the button for the lobby. I was going home, back to New York, back to the silence of my corner office, back to the world I had built without him. The ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in St. Louis was filled with 500 people. It was a sea of black ties, evening gowns, and the distinct, low hum of expensive conversation. The floral arrangements were white lilies and hydrangeas, towering over tables set with heavy silver and crystal. It was the kind of event that cost more than my first year's salary, and every cent of it was paid for by the firm that now owned the room. It had been exactly 1 year since the acquisition. The integration was complete. The firm was no longer a distressed asset. It was the Midwest powerhouse of Whitaker and Sloan. Revenue was up 40%. We had hired 20 new associates. We had poached 2 major partners from a rival firm in Chicago. The machine was humming, efficient and profitable. Tonight was the victory lap. Officially, it was a retirement gala for Richard Caldwell. It was the night the legal community came together to toast his 40-year career, to slap him on the back, and to pretend that he was stepping down solely because he wanted to spend more time sailing. I stood near the back of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water. I was wearing a dress that was structured like armor. Black velvet, high neck, sharp lines. I watched my father working the room. He looked good. He looked relieved. He was shaking hands, laughing at jokes he had heard 1,000 times, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. He had no idea that 3 days ago, I had found the letter. When we finalized the physical merger, we had to clear out the basement archives of the St. Louis office. Thousands of boxes of paper files going back decades were being digitized or shredded. I had sent a team down to handle it, but for some reason, I had decided to walk through the archives myself on Tuesday. I found a box labeled Personal/Correspondence. 1999. 1999, the year I graduated from law school, the year I applied for a prestigious clerkship with a federal appellate judge, Judge Harrison. It was the job everyone wanted. It was the golden ticket to a high-powered career. I had interviewed perfectly. I had the grades, I had the recommendations, and I had been rejected. I never knew why. I had assumed I just wasn't good enough. I assumed Judge Harrison saw through me, saw the softness my father always talked about. That rejection had haunted me for a decade. It fueled my imposter syndrome. It made me work twice as hard because I believed I was starting from a deficit. In that box, sandwiched between a tax return and a golf club membership renewal, I found a carbon copy of a letter signed by Richard Caldwell. It was addressed to Judge Harrison. I remembered standing in the dusty basement, reading the words under the fluorescent light. Dear Arthur, regarding the application of my daughter, Vanessa, while her academic record is strong, I feel a duty as a friend to be candid. Vanessa is a diligent student, but she lacks the emotional constitution for the pressure of your chambers. She is fragile. I worry that placing her in such a high-stakes environment would be detrimental to her health. I would appreciate it if you would gently steer her toward a different path, perhaps something less adversarial. He had not just neglected me. He had not just ignored me. He had sabotaged me. He had used his friendship with a federal judge to kill my career before it even started. He had told a powerful man that I was weak, ensuring that the door would be slammed in my face, and he had done it while pretending to be a supportive father. Watching me cry over the rejection letter and telling me, well, maybe it is for the best. I stood in the ballroom, watching him laugh with the mayor of St. Louis. I felt a cold, jagged rage in my chest. It was different from the anger I felt during the acquisition. That was business. This was theft. He had stolen an opportunity I had earned. He had stolen my confidence. He had let me believe for 20 years that I was the problem. I checked my watch. The speeches were scheduled to start in 20 minutes. I signaled to Elena. She was standing by the stage, holding the run-of-show clipboard. Bring him to the green room. I said, now. She saw my face. She did not ask questions. She nodded and moved toward Richard. 5 minutes later, the door to the private holding room clicked shut behind us. The sounds of the party were muffled here. It was just me, Richard, and a bucket of ice with a bottle of champagne in it. Richard looked flushed and happy. Vanessa, he said, adjusting his bow tie. What a turnout. Did you see the governor is here? This is fantastic. You really outdid yourself with the planning. I did not speak. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folded piece of paper. I walked over to him and held it up. He squinted. What is this? Read it, I said. He took the paper. He put on his reading glasses. I watched his face. I saw the moment the recognition hit. I saw the color drain out of his cheeks, leaving them ashen. His hands started to shake, rattling the paper. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, terrified. Where did you get this? He whispered. It was in the basement. I said, you forgot to shred it. Vanessa, he started, his voice trembling. This was a long time ago. 1999, I said. I was 24. I spent 3 months preparing for that interview. I memorized every opinion Harrison had ever written. I crushed that interview. And then I got a rejection letter that made me question my own sanity for 10 years. I stepped closer to him. Why? I asked. The word came out like a whip crack. Richard backed up until he hit the edge of the sofa. He looked trapped. I thought I was protecting you, he stammered. Harrison was a tyrant. He worked his clerks to death. I didn't want you to burn out. I didn't want you to get hurt. Liar. I said. I looked at him with total clarity. You were not protecting me from burnout. You were protecting yourself from me. Richard froze. You knew. I said, you knew I was good. You saw my grades. You saw my drive. And it terrified you. You knew that if I got that clerkship, I would be on a fast track that you never had. I would outpace you. I would be the real lawyer in the family. And you would just be the local guy with a mid-sized firm. I leaned in, my face inches from his. You sabotaged me because you were jealous. You were a grown man, and you were jealous of your own daughter. Richard looked at the floor. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. He took a ragged breath. Then, finally, the last wall crumbled. Yes, he whispered. I stared at him. Yes, he said again, louder. You were so intense. Vanessa, even in law school, you had this focus. It was unnatural. I looked at you and I saw everything I wasn't. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. It was a pathetic sight. A man in a tuxedo crying in a green room. I was scared. He admitted. I was scared that if you got big, really big, you wouldn't need me anymore. You wouldn't look up to me. I wanted to keep you close. I wanted to keep you manageable. Manageable, I repeated. I took the letter back from his hand. I looked at this man, this small, fearful man who had defined my life. I held the power now. I held all of it. I could walk out onto that stage right now. I could take the microphone. I could read this letter to the 500 people in the ballroom. I could tell them that the man they were toasting was a fraud who stabbed his daughter in the back. I could destroy his legacy in 5 minutes. He would be humiliated. He would be a pariah. It would be justice. But then I looked at the mirror on the wall. I saw myself. I saw Vanessa Green. Managing partner. If I destroyed him publicly, I would just be the angry daughter. I would be part of the drama. I would be letting his weakness define my victory. I did not want to be part of his story anymore. I wanted him to be a footnote in mine. I folded the letter and put it back in my purse. Fix your face, Richard, I said. He looked at me, confused. What? You have 10 minutes. I said, fix your face. We are going out there. You are not going to tell them? He asked, hope flaring in his eyes. No, I said, I am not going to tell them. He slumped with relief. Oh, God. Thank you. Vanessa. Thank you. I promise. I will. But, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his gratitude like a scalpel. You are going to tell them. He froze. What? I am not going to expose you. I said, that is messy. But I am not going to let you stand on that stage and take a victory lap you do not deserve. I am not going to let you accept the applause for building a legacy when I am the one who saved it. I pointed to the door. You are going off script. I said, you are going to go out there, and you are going to tell the truth. Not the ugly details of the letter. I will keep that. That is my insurance. But you are going to admit that you were wrong about me. You are going to admit that you failed to see my talent. And you are going to admit, publicly and on the record, that this firm exists today only because I saved it. I checked my watch. You have to acknowledge me. Richard, not as your daughter, but as the superior lawyer. If you can do that, if you can finally truly give me the credit I earned 20 years ago, then you get to retire with your dignity. If you can't, then I read the letter. Richard looked at me. He saw that I was serious. He saw that this was the only way out. He took a deep breath. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his eyes. He straightened his tie. Okay, he said. His voice was steady. Okay. We walked out of the green room together. The ballroom went quiet as we approached the stage. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium. Richard walked up the steps. He looked at the crowd. He looked at his partners. He looked at the empty chair where Dylan should have been. Dylan, who was now working as a junior consultant at a logistics firm, banished from the legal world by his own greed. Then Richard looked at me. I was standing in the front row, arms crossed, waiting. He gripped the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. His voice echoed through the hall. I had a speech prepared tonight, he said. I had a speech about hard work, and history, and the 40 years I spent building Caldwell, Pierce, and Finch. He paused. He took a sip of water. But I'm not going to give that speech, because it is not entirely true. The room went very still. People sensed the shift. This was not the standard retirement fluff. We tell ourselves stories, Richard said, especially fathers. We tell ourselves that we know what is best. We tell ourselves that we are the teachers. He looked directly at me, for a long time. I told myself that my daughter, Vanessa, was not built for this world. I told myself, and I told many of you, that she was too soft, that she lacked the killer instinct. He shook his head. I was lying. He said, I was lying to myself, and I was lying to you. I did not hold her back because she was weak. I held her back because she was exceptional, and I was afraid of that. A murmur went through the crowd. This was raw. This was uncomfortable, but nobody looked away. This firm, Richard continued, his voice rising, was dying a year ago. We were drowning. I was ready to sell it for parts. It was Vanessa who stepped in. Not to save me, but to save the work. She saw value where I saw ruin. She had the vision I lacked. She had the strength I pretended to have. He lifted his glass. So tonight, do not toast me. I am just the past. Toast Vanessa Green. She is the one who built the world we are standing in. She is the real lawyer, and I am just grateful that she let me stick around long enough to learn from her. He stepped back. The applause started slowly, confused at first, and then it swelled. It grew louder and louder. It wasn't polite applause. It was genuine. The room understood what had just happened. They saw the transfer of power. Richard looked at me. He looked exhausted, but he also looked lighter. He had finally put down the weight of his own ego. I walked up the stairs. I took the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the young associates I had promoted. I saw Maya, who was now a partner. I saw the clients who had stayed. I did not smile. I did not cry. Thank you. Richard, I said. I looked at the crowd. My father is right. I said, it was hard. It was unfair. And it was exhausting. There were years where I thought I was shouting into a void. I paused, but the void is gone. I said, we are here. We are Whitaker and Sloan, and we are just getting started. I signaled for the music to start. The band began to play. The waiters began to pour the wine. The party resumed, but the energy was different now. The ghost was gone. I walked off the stage. I did not stay for the backslapping. I did not stay for the congratulations. I walked out of the ballroom, down the long corridor, and into the elevator. I went up to the penthouse suite, which we were using as a temporary office. I unlocked the door and walked in. It was dark and quiet. I walked to the window. Below me, St. Louis was a grid of lights. I could see the arch in the distance, a silver curve against the black sky. I thought about the 9-year-old girl sitting on the patio steps, hearing her father say she wasn't built for this. I thought about the 24-year-old woman crying over a rejection letter she didn't deserve. They were still with me, but they weren't hurting anymore. They were just memories. I took the letter out of my purse, the carbon copy from 1999. I walked over to the shredder in the corner of the room. I fed the paper into the machine. It made a sharp, grinding sound. The lies turned into confetti. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. He once said I would never be real. I looked at the city. I looked at the empire I commanded. Now, he works inside the world I built, and that is enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of grit, betrayal, and ultimate vindication. I would love to hear your thoughts. Where are you tuning in from? Are you listening from your office, your car, or maybe while you're grinding away at your own goals late at night? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading your stories. If you enjoyed Vanessa's journey, please make sure to subscribe to Emma Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that the best revenge is massive success. See you in the next story.